Don't you think sometimes that your adversaries, the defenders of free market, like regulated capitalism, might be winning the struggle when you look at the banks today, 5 years into the crisis, and the bonuses, the situation overall? Don't you get the feeling that they're winning?
They're winning tactically most of the battles, but the question is who wins the war. I think their victories are increasingly Pyrrhic. I think that they even recognize that. When you talk to people in the ruling class, which I occasionally have the opportunity to do, what I find is, about 90% of them, maybe even 95% of them don't even think about the future. They just assume things will take care of themselves. They're all taught in business school to have a 3-year horizon, and that's it. The ones who actually think in the long term are terrified. They realize that, yeah, we won the battles, but in doing so, we're destroying the very infrastructure of what makes our position possible. And that's partly because they've put all their emphasis on the ideological war. And they've been very good at that. They've managed to convince people that no other system is possible. And not just no other system than capitalism, no other system than the very specific type of financialized, militarized capitalism that happens to exist right now, which is itself very unusual historically. That's the only system that could possibly exist. But at the same time, they put all of their effort into winning that ideological battle and no effort into creating the foundations of a system that actually could exist over the long term. I talked to some people at the Federal Reserve who were predicting a year ago, in 2 or 3 years there was going to be another crash worse than 2008. So I think that by their emphasis on winning the ideological war, they've essentially put themselves in a situation where everything around them is crumbling. And we have this strange, anomalous circumstance where people are watching the system falling apart and saying to themselves, but wait, I thought this is the only system that could possibly exist. What are we going to do now?
But don't you think that at the same time, by your own description, they demonstrate an extraordinary capacity to adapt and move on and survive?
Well, that's what you say about every system until it falls apart. I'm sure if we were sitting here in, 400 AD, people would be saying that about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire can absorb anything. All these barbarians come in, we just make them Roman generals, we just incorporate them into the system. The system will just absorb and adopt anything you throw at it, and then one day it didn't work anymore.
How would you recognize the shift? How would you recognize that you're winning and they're not winning?
Well, I recognize it by what's happening around the world. I mean, we've managed to change the very idea of what democracy is. That's a historical achievement. Just another thing that I would say that I got from Wallerstein. He said, is that, you've had a revolution when there's a change in common sense. That's why I find it so significant that democratic movements don't take the form that they did even a generation ago. Essentially, anarchist ideals and principles are the very core of democratic movements now. That's a major shift. Anarchism used to be thought of as completely insane. If you talk to people actually organizing things on the ground, almost all of them concede that those basic ideas, direct action, direct democracy, rejection of bureaucratic institutional structures to make change, rejection of the idea of seizing state power, changing society from above, pretty much everyone accepts that. And that's a really big world historical change in political common sense.
With those principles of political anarchism in mind, how do you evaluate the traditional left? The left in Europe, in America, all over the world?
How do I think the traditional left has really taken on a stupid policy. I mean, here you have in the UK a left that felt that in order to be considered reasonable, they had to simultaneously embrace the market and bureaucracy at the same time. You look at the education system here. You see the results. It's complete nightmare. It's like the worst of all possible world scenario. Then they're surprised that working class people vote for the right. I think that the conventional left is no longer the represents the interests of the mass majority of their traditional constituents. It certainly doesn't represent the working class anymore. Certainly in America and Europe, it represents essentially what they used to call the professional managerial classes, administrators, people who sit in offices and manage things, professionals, doctors and lawyers, and journalists and academics too, people like us. That's who's essentially represented by those parties. And in a way, I think the idea of what a working class is being reorganized. You know, the paradigm for work is no longer the guy in the factory. It's a nurse. It's a teacher. You know, so I think that there's a real change in the sort of class orientation, what the opposition is. Those people really came out strongly for movements like Occupy because we embodied this idea of a community where people care about each other. That was the sort of key symbol.
With your political principles and ideals, and you look at what's happening around the world, besides these street movements that you just described and your appreciation for what they do, what excites you? What do you see that you think it's got a good potential?
Well, there's a series of movements going on right now which seem to have legs. The two that I'm involved with are, first of all, debt cancellation. There's a real feeling, again, even shared by those people those people in the ruling class who actually do care about the long-term viability of the system, that something has to be done. And you talk to them honestly, they'll usually admit, well, of course debt cancellation is going to happen. The question is how. The question is when, how much. You have to bear in mind that debt resistance is going on all the time. 1 out of every 7 Americans is being pursued by a bailiff or a debt collector. The default rate on mortgages, on student loans is incredibly high. Probably, you know, at least 1 out of every 4 Americans is like simply not paying debts. In a way, like what is practicing civil disobedience against finance capitalism more than not paying your debts? So this is happening. The question is how to organize it, and people are starting to do that. There's movements starting up here in the UK, America. There's already very strong things happening in Spain, which I think provide a really wonderful model for what we could be doing. So there's debt resistance, so that's inspiring. There's the gradual creation of structures of direct democracy that come out of Occupy, because even though America has essentially repealed the First Amendment, at least when it comes to freedom of assembly, we just don't have the right to assemble in public anymore. We're continuing to organize, so we're creating a culture of direct democracy. Hence, you have things like Hurricane Sandy. I thought that was very inspiring. You know, when there was a natural disaster that struck New York, who were the first people in the streets doing relief? Not the government, not the NGOs, it was us. It was Occupy. We had 40,000 people there doing that. So once you create that culture of direct democracy, you know, you have the power to do things that other people can't. We can prove time and time again that our ways of organizing are actually more effective. And finally, there is basic income initiatives are becoming a really big thing, which I find really interesting. I'll give you an example of why I think this is important. I'm living here in London, and in the UK, ever since the 1960s, every few years, we've had another amazing band, you know, starting with the Beatles and the British Invasion groups, everything from the Clash to, there's hundreds of bands that have come out of England, seem to just regularly generate amazing music. All of a sudden it stops. You don't really have these breakaway amazing English pop bands anymore. What happened? So I asked a lot of my friends, and they all said the same thing. They got rid of the dole. Every single one of those bands was actually on public relief. That's how young people had enough time that they could get together and practice. And now they have all these work requirements. All the same guys who could be John Lennon are off like carrying boxes or doing menial tasks somewhere. How does society benefit from this? You know, if you give people a chance to do anything they want, people aren't lazy.
The Beatles again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people aren't lazy. People want to do something to contribute to society, and some people have amazing ideas of what they could do if you just let them do whatever they want.
Thanks very much, David.